So thank you everyone for coming along this morning. I'm looking forward to giving you a short presentation on the exhibition Natalia Goncharova, which is a retrospective exhibition that we're presenting in the Isle Ofer galleries, that's level 3 west, where the Bonnard exhibition previously was. One of the challenges that we faced in putting on this exhibition was thinking about name recognition, which is one of the favourite expressions of our marketing department here. How do we get people through the door? So we realised that part of the task would be in trying to convey the extraordinary life and practice of this artist who worked across many different disciplines, taking a wide range of inspirations and worked in a variety of styles. So this just gives you the scope of the lenders that we worked with for this exhibition. You'll see in the section, the category Russia, that we are borrowing from all over the region. And in fact, one of the lenders for the exhibition remarked yesterday how extraordinary it was that we were borrowing from some of the regional museums in Russia. And it should be known that the Goncharova is a really treasured artist in that country, despite having lived in Paris for most of her career. We were really only able to do this exhibition with the relationship that we have with the Stage Tretyakov Gallery in Moscow, who became the kind of the de facto guardians of Goncharova's work. Just to explain on a biographical note, so Goncharova, for much of her life partner was the artist Mikhail Larionov, and often they're paired together. So even though we are delighted to be presenting the first really major solo retrospective of Goncharova's art, I think she's often been closely associated with Larionov. So part of what we wanted to do was to bring her from out of his shadow. Before Goncharova passed away, Larionov and Goncharova married, and it was purely for this reason, so that should one or the other pass away, that the other person would be able to take care of their joint legacy. Larionov married very shortly before he passed away to a neighbour of theirs called Alexandra Larionova Tomilina, and then she was in charge of ensuring that their legacy was returned to Russia. I think that even though they left Paris before the outbreak of the 1917, so even though they left Moscow before the start of the 1917 revolution, they always felt this longing for Russia and for their works to be returned there. So this is a little backstory as to how we were able to put this exhibition together. And the structure of the exhibition is loosely chronological, but mainly focusing on key themes throughout her life. With this challenge of of her name not being widely recognised, we wanted to really forcefully create a message of her earlier inspirations and influences. So Goncharova was born in 1881 in Tula province, which is just outside of Moscow. And she was the daughter of impoverished aristocrats. They made their fortune through textile industries. So in this room, we've brought together not only the paintings by Goncharova, which features this subject matter of people washing the canvases, of these decorative textiles being worn, but also the inspirations to her. So for those who've had a peek into the first room, you'll see that we've got this festive folk costume from that region of Tula to really impress upon audiences what Goncharova's visual inspirations were. And then another forceful message that we wanted to impart was that of Goncharova's fame and notoriety during her own lifetime. She was an artist who within Moscow society people had heard of. This also gives us an opportunity to put her within the context of those artists that Sergei Shukin and Ivan Morozov collected. So Morozov and Shukin were the major collectors of their day, and they tended to collect, they travelled to Paris and collect the latest trends in French modernism. And to give examples of this, we include works in this room by Pablo Picasso and André Derain. But they were also collectors, most famously, of Matisse and Gauguin as well. And the extraordinary thing is these collectors, they saw a social obligation in sharing these amazing collections with the public. So on occasion, they would open their homes and give guided tours of their collections. And we understand that Goncharova and Larionov would visit, and this was an opportunity for them to experience the latest art beyond Russia. And you'll see the work at the bottom here, Peasants Picking Apples, is the one that we selected really to promote the exhibition and communicate it more widely. I think it was suggested to us that one of the portraits, the frontal portraits that Goncharova made, would be a very compelling way of getting people through the door, but we said no, we wanted to actually place her within this tradition of modernist painting, the bright colours, the flat planes, flattened perspective, and simplified figures. So from these first two rooms, we come into a room in which we've actually taken out a lot of the walls that might usually be there for these Level 3 West exhibitions and created this kind of vast open space. And this room is intended to evoke Goncharova's 1913 exhibition. So thinking about, yes, like at Tate, we're doing a lot to highlight the work of women artists who've previously been overlooked. A really extraordinary story associated with this exhibition is that it was the first, it was the largest of any avant-garde Russian artist to that time, let alone whether they were male or female. And by this point, Goncharova was 32 years old, and the exhibition included, reputedly, over 800 individual works, which I think were painted over a roughly 8-year period. So it certainly puts me to shame thinking, like, what have I achieved in that time? And she was working in such a variety of styles, and I hope that in mixing up this room, it's a double hang, which is also something that we don't usually do. But we really hope to convey to visitors just the range and audacity of her work. And I think moving around the room, we see her works not only looking to kind of country life, agricultural workers. We've created a vitrine that looks both into the first and this third room of the exhibition of the folk costume that I described, to show this thread, as it were, that runs through her practice, this looking back to folk culture that she never loses throughout her life's work. We also show her looking at kind of marginalized societies within Russia. There's not featured here, but within the exhibition, there is a depiction of the Jewish shop and different forms of shop life. We've got a work called The Bread Seller from the Centre Pompidou. And then adjacent to that, we have a quartet of works looking at Goncharova's depiction of the female nude, which, would you believe, it was controversial at the time. I think in Russia, women were discouraged from life painting. I understand that they were banned in England at this time from women. This is women artists painting the female nude, and so this caused great controversy in Goncharova's lifetime. So this is one story we wanted to highlight. And then actually perhaps more visible here on the bottom right-hand side, we have a work called The City. So also Goncharova's depictions of urban life. Sorry, I should say that she moved to Moscow for her education, so leaving this kind of the country idyll behind. And then, these are the on the first two are the female nudes. And then this self-portrait on the right-hand side. And we were particularly interested in this work because we see Goncharova really kind of giving a sense of her self-identity and this persona as artist. She's wearing the kind of the loose white shirt of the artist, and she's surrounded by her artworks. And then on one wall of this room of the which evokes the 1913 exhibition, we were bringing together a multi-part work called The Harvest. And The Harvest originally started out in 9 parts, and unfortunately 2 are missing. No one knows what happened to them. Someone mentioned to us yesterday perhaps this exhibition will yield some inquiries as to, I don't know, people who might have the missing 2 parts. We can only dream. But we've brought together the 7 that do exist, and they're from different museums, 2 from the Centre Pompidou, 3 from the State Tretyakov Gallery, and 2 from regional museums in Russia, museums in Omsk and Kostroma. And actually this multi-part work, and particularly the image of the maiden on the beast, is a work that looks forward and it looks back. In the first room of the exhibition, we feature some popular prints, including a maiden on a beast. This is, and in including it, we wanted to point out the fact that Goncharova and Larionov were looking to popular culture as points of inspiration, not just high and lofty subjects. And then, as we see later on, Goncharova is also looking to this apocalyptic theme, essentially, in the creation of her print series. So the next room of the exhibition is a relatively small space, and it looks at Goncharova's work in fashion. And I think partly because of Goncharova's notoriety, aside from her paintings of nudes and also religious subjects, as we move on to look at shortly, Goncharova and Larionov were acutely aware of the kind of brand as artist, as it were, and Goncharova would partake in performances where she paraded the streets of Moscow with futurist symbols painted on her face. And there are stories from her contemporaries of how she would make her own clothes, but handmade clothes that were aspiring to be like the haute couture of the time. And it was because of this that she was then approached by couturiers such as Nadezhda Lamanova, for whom Goncharova collaborated on designs, both dresses and evening wear, and patterns and designs for fabric, patterns for fabric. And actually we can see the kind of very bold floral motif is carried from Goncharova's interest in folk art. One of the standout pieces from this room is this skirt pattern, which we've actually shown more like in the orientation of a fan. And I think that actually what this particular design on paper shows is Goncharova's awareness of other people then working with it, because she didn't work with the dressmaking and production of fabric herself. This was almost in a way a kind of instructional kind of pattern for how to carry out the making of this skirt. In Paris, Goncharova then ended up working with Marie Coutoli, who's known for the House of Mirbon, and Coutoli was also ingenious in kind of capitalizing on the fame and notoriety of artists. You might know that she commissioned artists such as Picasso to design tapestries for her fashion house. So then room 5 of the exhibition looks at the theme of war in Goncharova's art. We know that Goncharova and Larionov's lives and practices are closely intertwined, and Larionov was sent to fight in the First World War, but actually only fought for a very short period before he came back injured and shell-shocked. And in this room, we have a painting of Larionov and his platoon commander, and in the facing corner, we have this print series called The Mystical Images of War. And as you can already see on the top right-hand side, we have this depiction of the maiden on the beast. But moreover, what this print series does is express some of the anxieties that many felt with the thought of the impending war. Goncharova portrays it as an apocalyptic event, but in a really extraordinary way by combining modern technology with with biblical themes. I think the clearest example of that is the work Angels and Airplanes, just in the bottom third, the third work on the bottom. And so then, as mentioned earlier, Goncharova created controversy for her depiction of religious subjects. And this was also a genre that was seen as the preserve of men. Actually, this work was exhibited in Moscow, St. Petersburg, and also eventually in London as well. And it's really interesting to look at the responses at the time, because each city had quite different responses. I think this work was featured in an exhibition called The Donkey's Tail, which is a movement that Goncharova was a part of. And the Donkey's Tail is so named for an incident in which artists tied a paintbrush to the tail of a donkey just as an experiment. I don't think you could get away with that now. And it was for this it was said that the incompatibility of this religious theme with an exhibition of that title was unacceptable to the authorities in Russia. So Goncharova was at one point tried, but then acquitted for obscenity, as it was called. So you see that I've skipped a room here. As ever, the Slip Gallery of Level 3 West is a space for archival material. And actually, I thought I probably couldn't do it justice on this slide, because we've tried to create an immersive sound experience. So this room is dedicated to Goncharova's work in graphic design. She also contributed illustrations to compilations of Zaun poetry. Now, Zaun poetry is it's called either trans-rational or nonsensical poetry. And this was part of this kind of futurist endeavour to really pick apart language, to also reflect, I guess, in part the chaos of the war period, of the interwar period. So what we've done in that room is, for the books that Goncharova created illustrations, we've managed to borrow recordings from the Getty Research Institute in Los Angeles, in which they had someone reading out this kind of Russian nonsense words. And they've got a really great resource online if you're interested to know of the translations. But it was meant to just kind of really be this ambient sound for the kind of extraordinary experiments and wordplay that artists and poets were doing at that time. That room is also dedicated to Goncharova's work, Goncharova and Larionov's work for the artist balls that they designed for in Paris when they eventually moved there more permanently in 1916. Although, just to say, so when they were recruited by Sergei Diaghilev of the Ballet Russe to go to Paris, it wasn't intended that it would be permanent, and actually it ended up being this way. So I think this is a great tragedy for these artists, that their sense of home was so distant from them and so unreachable for the rest of their lives. The Union of Russian Artist Balls, which were fundraising balls in Paris. So Goncharova would design tickets and masks for these, and in fact she had a little stall in the balls where you could buy masks designed by her. So then the next room that we move into is more expansive and looks at Goncharova's work tackling various different modernist styles and tropes. So Goncharova was very interested in, and actually an interesting parallel to an artist she's often compared to, Sonia Delaunay, very interested in modern technology and the way that this changes our perception of the world. So things including street lighting and other new forms of technology. And in this room, we bring together some of the few significant works in British collections by Goncharova. It should be noted that actually Tate did previously have a Russian-born curator in the 1960s called Mary Chameau, and Mary Chameau did a lot to acquire Goncharova works, not only for this collection, but advising other British collections or the acquisitions of her work. And one of these is thought to be The Weaver, which we've brought down from the National Museum of Wales, which is just this work in the centre. I'd strongly encourage you for the works in this room to spend a long time looking at them. I know we're always saying a lot about slow looking, but the works are really rewarding the longer you spend with them. And the work in our own collection, Linen, is just on the left here, and the Cyclist on the right. So these works are considered within the category of Cubo-futurism, but we were also, not including this slide, but we were also interested in the way that Goncharova is positioned as one of the founders of Russian abstraction, which seems extraordinary when we're so familiar with the work by now of Malevich and Tatlin. But actually, Goncharova and Larionov together, their writings on Rayonism were highly influential, leading, in fact, the very kind of important curator of MoMA at that time, Alfred Barr, to cite Goncharova and Larionov as the founders of Russian abstraction at that time. And so the next room of the exhibition highlights some really monumental works by Goncharova. I think maybe it might be more fair to say, so when Goncharova and Larionov were in Paris, they travelled around with the Ballet Russe, who were travelling on rehearsals, performing in other countries, including in Switzerland and in Spain. But here we give an insight into the multiplicity of Goncharova's practice. We're incredibly fortunate to have been able to secure the loan of this 5-part screen from the Arts Club of Chicago. Goncharova was commissioned to make this amongst other versions of other forms of interior design, including for residences in Moscow. So kind of extraordinary to think that she was working on all of these things from Paris. But in that room as well, we have a major triptych called The Bathers. And what we've done is we've juxtaposed that with a poster design for one of the artist balls that Goncharova was involved with, just to show how Goncharova is using the forms across different media. This room as well also looks at this genre of the Spanish woman that Goncharova became very fascinated with and prompted her to make many works in this style. And it's said that when Goncharova went to Spain, she was immediately struck by the exuberance of the dress, the bright colours, and the use of floral motifs. So, as you can already imagine, this is already kind of reminding her of Russian folk culture. The work on the left being a key example of this work of the Spanish woman, and then the bathers on the right-hand side there. And then we reach the finale of the exhibition, which is a room dedicated to Goncharova's collaborations with the Ballet Russe. And so for those of you who aren't familiar with the Ballet Russe, this was a dance. I mean, I think it's almost reductive to say it was a dance company because it was so much more in terms of its influence. But it was a company that was founded by this impresario, Sergei Diaghilev. And Diaghilev was an entrepreneurial in bringing together many different Russian creatives, whether it be musical composers, artists, dancers, to Paris, where at that time in the 1910s, 1920s, Russia was all the rage in Paris. So Diaghilev was really capitalizing upon this and creating a very exoticized version of Russia for audiences in Paris. And these were true collaborations between performers, composers, and designers. And I hope that this room gives a sense of how closely Goncharova was working with musicians and dancers, responding to their choreography and understanding the importance of movement within balletic costume. The room primarily composes of works on paper, so designs for the theatre, and actual costumes that were used in productions. One of the ones I've highlighted here is the ballet Sadko, which is based on a Slavic epic poem, and it tells a story of the Guzli player Sadko and all of his different adventures, one of which includes being descending to the bottom of the ocean. So there are scenes in the ballet which are all set under the water, for which Goncharova, I suppose, had to deal with the challenge of how you convey that on stage and at a distance. So some of the costumes, I think, for the performers, the dancers who were fish, they had fins in very lightweight material that would sway with their movement. She would use metallic paints to create the effect of scales on some characters. And obviously we're very happy to have the costumes for Sadko himself and the sea princess who he marries in one scene of the ballet. And then we hope that this, for people who are who by now at this point in the exhibition have gotten the impression of Goncharova as an artist who works with colour, we're including works on paper from Les Noces, which is a short ballet about a peasant wedding ceremony, an arranged marriage, and all of the rituals that are enacted before the young couple marry. And one might wonder why Goncharova has abandoned colour in this work, but in fact, the use of brown and white are highly symbolic for her. We've included an earlier version of a backdrop that Goncharova made alongside these works, which is brightly colourful. In fact, I think she sets the ballet in the city. But she wrote about how this design underwent an evolution, and eventually it was drained of the very bright colours, because she saw brown and white as also being highly symbolic. I think she says that white is the colour of innocence, and brown referring to the earth of agricultural work. And alongside that, we've included some footage from a historic performance from 1978. It was the earliest one that we could find, but it incorporates the choreography of Bronislava Nijinská, with whom Goncharova worked very closely, and I hope conveys a sense of the kind of it's kind of a very intriguing and mysterious production. And then here, so it was funny. Last night I actually went to see the performance of The Firebird, which they're currently staging at the Royal Opera House. And as I was waiting in the foyer, I overheard someone saying, "Oh yes, and you know Tate are doing this Goncharova exhibition, and of course I'll be including the backdrop from The Firebird." And I was listening to this thinking, no, we're not. Because, as you can probably guess, it's a theatrical backdrop, so it's designed for the theatre. And unfortunately, our gallery spaces, at least in the space of the exhibition, are just not large enough to accommodate it. We'd have loved to have had it. I mean, some of you may recall it was in the Diaghilev Ballet Russe exhibition at the Victoria and Albert Museum. So what we've done here is we've included the beautiful design, which I would also strongly encourage you to have a closer look at. Goncharova's used this metallic paint on the domes of the buildings there, but it really, I think the works on paper are really accomplished works in themselves. And in speaking with a costume designer yesterday, I think they were particularly interested in how clear Goncharova's designs are, and I think it suggests an understanding of passing this design onto someone else, this collaborative effort of how someone else will have to realise the final design. And that's end of slideshow. Click to exit.
Hello.
Hello.
So could you just, I'm trying to figure out what her politics were, what her relationship with the Russian state was. And she lived in Paris, but did she move back to Russia at any stage?
She never returned to Russia from the point of going to Paris in 1916. I don't think that was ever her intention. I hope I've given a sense of how deep her affection and nostalgia for Russia was. She was, I would say her politics were were leftist. I mean, like her and Larionov's relationship was, I'd say, fairly bohemian. I think that the second wife that Larionov married shortly before his death, I mean, it was all completely known and open to each other. And I think Goncharova, in fact, had a romance with a socialist writer called Oreste Rosenfeld. So I'd say that's where her politics lent, but I don't think that she was outspoken about what was happening in Russia, at least from not from what I've seen. Maybe if you delve deeper into the correspondence.
Any more? Okay, thank you, Katie, so much.